This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Here on Where We Live, 2025 was a big year for books. We got to interview some truly amazing authors, and we launched a new initiative called Where We Read. You can stay up to date on all of our author conversations by signing up for our Where We Read newsletter. It goes out monthly and is for book lovers and the literary curious alike. Found out more on ctpublic.org/whereweread. And today, we're going to listen back to a few of our favorite conversations. We'll hear from Hartford native Ocean Vuong. He's the author of Emperor of Gladness. That's later. Up first, Connecticut native and author Wally Lamb is drawn to characters that he calls the walking wounded. Corby, the main character of Wally's latest book, The River is Waiting, is a deeply flawed husband and father, plagued with a substance abuse problem. He is charged with involuntary manslaughter and sent to prison after the tragic death of his son. It is a story that explores the complexities of addiction, reckoning, and forgiveness, and the injustice that exists in prisons today. Wally joined us back in August to talk about his new book. Let's jump in. It's been 9 years since you released your last novel. So what was going on in your life when you first start imagining the character of Corby and sort of putting this story together? Did you hear his voice, see his character? What was your brain doing?
My brain was recoiling, actually, from a news item that I saw about these terrible, tragic accidents. There's even a name. They're backover accidents. And where usually a toddler or a young child cannot be seen in the backup camera, and usually it's a parent at the wheel. And according to this article, in 9 times out of 10, the child survives, and then in one time out of 10, the child dies of injuries. And so at the time, I was the grandfather of a toddler living down in New Orleans, and an infant, his baby sister. And I knew that my son did not have a backup camera in his older car, and I was so freaked out that I called him up and I said, "Hey, if you want to fly up, you can take my car. I just bought it, and it had a camera that you could see, behind you." And I said, "Come on up and take it, and I'll just get another car." And so he did that, and that made me feel better. But still, what was happening in that article, it sort of got a hold of me. And at that point, there's another tributary, I guess I would call it, that I had just finished off a 20-year volunteer teaching position at York CI, the women's prison in Niantic, and so I knew quite a bit about the reasons why people come to prison, and also what happens when they get there.
So it obviously stuck with you, and the story came to you. And so before we get deep into the story, for our listeners who have not read the book yet, here's what you should know about Wally's new book. After being laid off as a commercial artist, Corby becomes the full-time caretaker to his twins. He becomes addicted to alcohol and prescription anxiety medication, and even starts drinking to start off the day. And one morning when Corby is under the influence, he ends up backing over his son Nico with their family car and killing Nico, which is every parent's worst nightmare. And so, as you just shared with us sort of the beginnings of why you decided to write this story, this also is not the first character that you've written who is navigating grief. But navigating the death of a child is an incredibly unique and terrible experience. Where did you draw insight on this so you can write about it with authenticity and being productive with it?
Well, I think for most of my adult life, I have been pretty empathic. I think I learned that when I was teaching high school kids, and it sort of was presented to me that not everybody has a a stable 2-family home, and so these were the students that I was most drawn to. The kids who had a tough home life or a tough school life, and I think that's part of that is where it came from. As I developed the character of Corby, I had to develop his childhood, and so I saw, and really, when I say I saw, it's not like in my head I was plotting out,
Right.
the plot points of the novel, but I saw that he was, he was verbally abused by a father who was unhappy with the way his life was, and was critical of him, and so that was an important thing for me to know as I was developing adult Corby. And it came to me, little by little and deeper as I became involved in the story.
And so after the death of his son, Corby starts going to Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous meetings very soon after. And before the accident, his alcohol and drug abuse was hidden from his wife and his family. So it was a sort of quiet type of movement, right? Sort of in the shadows. Was that a deliberate choice?
Yes. And, I wrestled with my own drinking, which had become alcoholic when I was in my 50s, and some of those patterns, I'm sorry to say, some of those were my own patterns. I drank usually at night quietly. I didn't go to bars or anything, and so there was, as I became as my problem increased. Some of that sneakiness, that was part of my behavior too. Yeah, I drank alcoholically for about 10 years during my 50s, and then I was able to go into a 12-step program and climb out of that dark hole.
I'm glad you were able to find support.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
to get out of that,
Thank
because
you.
I think it's one of those things. I feel like it's a lot more complex, right?
Yeah.
Than people think. I think on the surface. And
Yes.
I actually
Yeah.
started my career covering a lot of crime cases,
Mm-hmm.
and so I spent a lot of time with youth who are in homes that was not my home,
Yeah.
and that really gave me insight to. We don't all choose how we were brought up, but we can decide what to do with our future.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's sort of a theme that we see with Corby, which is very slow, I will say, right? There are moments you're like, Corby, come on.
Yeah. Right.
But I think most of us will understand that that's a slow process,
Yeah.
and it's difficult. And with what you just shared too, because we do go through it with Corby, really, right? I think what happens to him, it feels like it's happening to us. Did you feel a sort of personal responsibility to carry the message of the 12 steps through this novel, maybe as a way to let people know that you can get help if you need it?
Well, that is a message that I hope gets delivered when the book is finished. But no, that was not my intent. I was just sort of trying to make it as real as possible.
And so another theme. There are so many themes in this book. I feel like we need an entire show just to talk about the themes. But I think one thing that you do touch on is the changing role of fatherhood.
Uh-huh.
And Corby seems to really love being a dad, or at least that's what he says. But his actions, from the day drinking to abusing prescription pills, it makes me feel like he was really struggling with his role as the at-home parent.
Yes.
And I think he also emphasizes that he's sort of the fun dad, right? Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a lot of men out there who might be struggling to navigate their roles as parents?
Yes, I think that's accurate. He likes that role of being the fun dad. But the fun dad doesn't have to have the responsibility that the unfun parent has.
Right.
And so, in a way, he's a little bit shirking, that responsibility. But he adores the kids. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is fascinating for him is to see these fraternal twins, one boy and a girl, how their personalities are developing, how they're really diverging in terms of what their specialties are, let's say. And so, he's just delighted to be a father, but he's also weak because he's not the traditional father who is, bringing the bacon home. That falls to his wife through no fault of his own. I mean, he's laid off from a job, and that's when the addiction, starts to grow and become a problem.
And I'm assuming it was deliberate, but I want to ask if it was deliberate to have Corby be this role, sort of reversing the traditions. Why was that important for you to sort of present in someone like Corby?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think I, was thinking of it intellectually. But my wife and I were, back when we were having kids, we were both teachers. And so what we would do is take off half a year. I was the stay-at-home parent for half a year, and then my wife was. And I remember the challenges of bringing the kids to the toddlers to the Y for their swimming lessons, and having being the women who were I was mostly surrounded by young moms, sure. And they would bring the kids to to the changing room and so forth, and I would yell into the changing room for the women, is Justin ready yet? Hi, Justin, I'm out here, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so it is, I think society kind of, and I don't know, maybe that's different now, but I think sure. Society presumes that the female parent is going to be, the caretaker parent.
Well, obviously you just gave us a little glimpse, but it sounds like you enjoyed it.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah. I love kids. I like to play with them, and in fact, if there's a room like a party or something, I would much rather play with the kids than talk to the adults. I'm not. I have a little bit of social anxiety, and but you can do shtick with the kids, and right. They always love it.
I think we can all appreciate that, which is so funny because kids will tell you the truth, whether or not you want to hear it, though.
Oh, yes, they will. Yes, they will.
And so, talking about Corby's character, of course, because he's our main character, so our focus will be mostly on him today. But you've also spoken before about how this story was originally going to be told from two perspectives, which was going to be Corby and his wife Emily, and so as they navigate life after the death of their son Nico. But in the final version, of course, we hear the story only from Corby, and so we learn about Emily and we get to know Emily through Corby. So, what made you decide to ultimately go with the single point of view?
It was something that was suggested for me by my editor, who is now my publisher. She has risen in the ranks at Simon & Schuster, Mary Sue Rucci, and she said to me, because I was going to do the points of view in tandem. It was going to be a Corby point of view and then an Emily point of view, and go back and forth and back and forth. And she said, "No," she said, you write women well, but I think it would be better if you stick to Corby's point of view, and she can, she can be presented through his eyes, and you can still have her represented. But she said it's really his story of an effort to redeem himself, and she says, so why don't you stick with that? And I remember initially I'm thinking to myself, oh yeah, Mary Sue, come on, I've got all these chapters done, right. And then damn it, I eventually couldn't not hear her say that, and I'm grateful in the end. I work in a writers group. I always have with other Connecticut authors, poets, and fiction writers, and creative nonfiction writers. And lots of times when they're discussing new work by me, I just sit there and I jot down what they're saying. I never take part in the conversation. And lots of times what happens is that I'm writing it down, what they're saying, but I'm sort of rejecting it as I'm writing it. But then, when the experience cools off, 2 days later, I see that's exactly what I needed to hear.
That's Wally Lamb, author of The River is Waiting. He's also the author of She's Come Undone and I Know This Much Is True. We'll be back with Wally after a short break. This is Where We Live. and we're revisiting our best conversations with Connecticut authors from 2025. Stay with us. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. What does it mean to make amends, to find forgiveness? That's one of the central questions in Wally Lamb's new novel, The River is Waiting. The book follows one man's experience in prison after being convicted of involuntary manslaughter for the death of his son. Today, as part of our year in review with some of our favorite interviews with Connecticut authors, we're listening back to my conversation with Wally. Let's jump back in. And we mentioned earlier, too, that Corby does eventually end up in prison. And we spent a lot of time in the story with Corby in prison, almost like we're experiencing it together. Where did your research and curiosity about men's prison start?
Well, my research and curiosity about men's prison started with my experience with the women in the prison that I was teaching. And what is common, I mean, obviously, men's prisons and women's prisons are different, right. Nobody plans to go to prison. You know, you don't sit there and go, I think I'll go to prison when I'm an adult. Right. It happens because of life circumstances and bad decisions. And so I think that's common between men and women. And then some of the structure of prison is really the same. Now, I did plenty of research about men's prisons, and there's a lot of it out there. You can read firsthand accounts when people get out of prison, and they write about their experiences there. So, yeah, I did my homework, but I think the overall experience of working with the women and seeing how they navigated the structures of prison and their relationships with the correctional officers and so forth. There are a couple of really horrible correctional officers in the novel, but I hope that that people who read the book see also that there are, benign and in some cases very helpful guards as well. I didn't want to present like an overall, a superficial thing, or like the guards are the bad guys.
Right. Well, I guess in some ways, sort of bring the humanness to a community like being in prison, because it's a space that a lot of people do not experience. Right. Do you remember the first time you went to one? What was that like for you? Yeah.
Well, I had just come off two Oprah's book club hits, I call them, and those were wonderful experiences. Sort of got me out on the road, and obviously it helped with the book sales and so forth. And then I came home, and I was scratching my head and going, okay, why did this happen to me? There are so many great writers out there. Greater than I am, and so finally I decided, well, I don't really need to know, or I can't really know why this happened to me, but what's incumbent on me is to give back, to sort of thank the universe for this great good luck, this grace that I've been given, and so I wrote bigger checks to. To charitable organizations, but that didn't really please me too much. And so then I got a call from a woman named Margie Cohen, who I had played dodgeball with in the streets when we were kids, and she was the librarian at the York prison, and she said, "We're really we're struggling here." It was a Governor John Rowland he was in charge of the state, and he had said partly to get elected, these Connecticut prisons are not going to be Club Meds when I'm in charge. And so what had happened was that, a lot of psychiatric services were being cut and so forth. So Margie said, we're in trouble here. We've had a couple of suicides, and there are several more attempts, and we just want to distract the women. So could you please come and just talk about your work? And so I said reluctantly, I said, okay, here's karma challenging me. I want to do something. So I went thinking I was going to go one time. So I did a class and talked about my writing. At the end, I said, does anybody have any questions about writing? And, the questions were things like, so Oprah? And does Oprah wear false eyelashes and stuff like that? Those were their curiosities about the writing process. And so at the end of that class, when I was packing up and ready to check it off, okay, that's done. One of the women raised her hand, and she had been scowling at me throughout the program. And I said, and she said, thanks for coming. And I said, oh, you're welcome. And she said, are you coming back? And so I didn't, I was a little bit scared of her. So I said,
she felt your reluctance.
Yeah. Right. So I said, okay, you write a couple of pages of something, anything, I don't care. And then, come into the class. That'll be your ticket back in here, and we'll have a writing workshop. And so we went from about 40 women in that first class to about 8 women who really were interested in writing. And so from those 8, they were, their first drafts were as terrible as my first drafts, but that's how it started. And I could see when I came back time after time, first of all, that they really liked the fact that I was showing up, and secondly, that they were really interested in getting the writing to be the best it can be. So, in other words, they were willing to revise, and then I was able to sort of teach them some of the techniques of how you react to writing, by somebody else, and what you don't say. You don't attack the person, et cetera, and you kind of focus on what's not there yet and what's there but needs to be cut and what needs to be clarified.
Well, it sounds like it was sort of a catalyst in both your professional and your personal life. And the fact that you talked about how because you showed up and so they showed up. What goes through your mind when you think about maybe you're one of the few people that show up for them?
Well, I'm not sure if I would. There's a lot of people who are there for religious services, and people focus on moms in prison and so forth. But I think what happened was that they, as much as I, sort of created this. It was like an island of safety within the prison, and prison is a place where it's probably a good idea not to trust people too much. But they were able to be candid enough in their writing to let go of secrets that they had kept, for many, many years. In some cases, all their lives. If they were incested by a grandfather or a brother or an uncle or something like that, they were instructed that you never ever tell anybody about this, and threatened, that they were not going to tell anybody about this. And so when they unleashed some of these secrets, that's when their energy sort of came, and then they couldn't stop writing, And then it's a different thing to write it and to read it in front of others. And so as they began to see from other women, oh yeah, that happened to me, or that they were in a safe place. And they went through testing of me too, because here I am, this white middle-aged guy. What's his deal? Why does he keep coming back? And I just, I'd been a teacher all my adult life, and I had never worked with such an exciting student group of students. So, and that's what kept me coming back. Yeah, I would drive down 395, complaining to myself, oh, I don't have time for this. I can't believe I'm still doing this. And then every time I left at the end of that, 3 hours, I would have a smile on my face, and I would be just incredibly grateful that they were willing to trust me.
That was Connecticut author Wally Lamb. His new book is The River is Waiting. He's also the author of She's Come Undone and I Know This Much Is True. Listen back to our full conversation by visiting ctpublic.org/wherewelive. After the break, we hear from another Connecticut author. And a reminder for our listeners, if you love book conversations, make sure to check out our new newsletter, Where We Read. It's got monthly reflections from me and my team about what we're reading, trends in the literary world, and podcast links to some of our latest author interviews. Find out more on ctpublic.org/whereweread. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're listening back to some of our favorite author conversations of 2025. Ocean Vuong was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and raised in Hartford. His mother worked in a nail salon, and his stepfather worked in manufacturing. He started writing his new book, The Emperor of Gladness, to start to navigate grief after his mother's death. Ocean also pulled from his own personal experience working in the fast food industry and spending 2 years acting as a caretaker for his partner's grandmother, Grazina. His new book is a beautiful exploration into those relationships and experiences that permanently change the shape of our lives and worldviews. I started our conversation by asking him how his mother inspired him to become a writer.
Well, I was raised by a group of women, my grandmother, my mother, and my two aunts. And they were the first storytellers. They were the first poets. Although they were not literate, storytelling was a deep part of their life. And it was also the moment where they imbued themselves with the most power. You know, they were all women who gave birth to all boys. So it was very, I like to call it Shakespearean in a way. But that brought up a very interesting dichotomy wherein you had a group of women raising men who were acquiring English at a much faster rate than they were. And so in this country, there was an immediate power imbalance amongst the sons and mothers. Not only that, but they were living in a patriarchal society. They were coming from a patriarchal society, and yet they were a matriarch. And so that dichotomy, I think, was deeply vexed. And for them, storytelling was a way to self-mythologize and redignify themselves amongst their children. And I think for me, I didn't know it then, but I realize it now that my first master class as a storyteller came from their stories.
Well, I love the way you put that because I feel like oftentimes when we're growing up, it really depends on the household, right? If storytelling is something that is important to the family, or if it's something that, as you say, it's a dignified way to explore language. But not all families necessarily put an importance to that. So can you dig a little deeper with me here with that experience as a child? You were born in Vietnam, raised here in Connecticut. How did the changes in environment, I know you came here very young, but different environments, being the son of an immigrant, shape your writing, especially with the added sort of, I guess, a different kind of experience with your own family in terms of storytelling?
Yeah. There's a lot of holes still, no matter how much you tell. And when you're telling stories to your children, you are framing yourself. And I think for them, there was a lot said, a lot repeated. And it's interesting that every time a story is repeated, it's a little different.
Yeah, definitely.
The idea of truth was very elliptical. But also, there were a lot of secrets that were left off the page, or rather the air, as I like to think of it, when they told their oral stories. And so to me, I think it's important for me as a writer to respect that decision. I don't believe, and I can't speak for other novelists, but I do not believe it is my role to bring my family's story into light. And I know this might sound surprising for people who've read my books, some of which might believe that I'm writing memoir or very thinly veiled fiction. But it's not the case. I've never interviewed my family for my work. I don't think I have the right to ask them to narrate their pain for my art. So instead, I see the context of their life, and I'm inspired by the historical context of their life. And then I imagine almost a parallel alternative universe in which I can imbue that context with the imagination, and that's where a lot of my work lies. And I joke sometimes. I say I think I'm a novelist because I'm a coward, because I don't have the fortitude to interrogate my elders. I think I would be in tears, or they would be, or what have you, within minutes if I'm trying to research for a memoir. So I write novels as a way to dodge that quest. But the more I grow older, I realize it's actually, I don't have a right to their stories. I think people, you know, people get to keep their stories, and if they choose to take it to the grave, that is their right. I think there is something sacred to that. And so to me, the novel is the perfect form to allow yourself to be inspired by people, but not be the mouthpiece for their lives.
Well, and I love that sort of separation. I think having an interview with somebody, right, like we're doing right now, but versus having a conversation or having your family members tell you stories, those are very, very different forms of chatting or conversation. And I don't want to get into too much parsing of what's quote, quote, real or not real, or fiction or nonfiction from your stories. But clearly that's something that you actively think about when you're crafting your novels.
Yeah, I think autofiction is deeply important to me. And I was deeply troubled as a literary student when it was so easily accredited to writing mostly from white writers in the early aughts, the early 2000s, and often around suburban vexation, which are all legitimate frames and themes. However, it seemed like when you say autofiction, those are the only writers that came to mind. But when you look at the history of a novelized autobiography, you can start with Claude McKay, a Jamaican American immigrant who wrote, in the 1920s, who wrote beautifully about the self traversing the political and historical vexations of the time. And you go from there to James Baldwin, Morrison's Bluest Eye, her debut, and also the work of actual autobiography, the narratives of Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, and also the first major Asian American text and novel in this country is from a Southeast Asian American named Carlos Bolosan, America is in the Heart. That is an autofiction work as well. And so I was deeply troubled to think, to see so much of this autofictive project erased in the literary discourse. And to me, those were the major inspirations for myself. And I think why autofiction and autobiographical work is so important to me as a person of color is that for a writer of color, the autobiographical eye in a work of fiction is always charged with a historical pressure. You can't just write about, the mundane without speaking about the Vietnam War, its aftermath, the racialization of Asian American bodies, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and foreign policy. Things that you rarely think of in association with autofiction. But again, in terms of the historic body in fiction, that is deeply, deeply rooted in that autobiographical work. And I'm invested in exploring it, perhaps even further as I go on.
Well, we appreciate the investment for sure, because I think that's really the experience that I got out of reading The Emperor of Gladness, actually, is there are so many reminders. And if we go through those reminders, we're going to need another hour just to talk about those reminders. But I'm glad that you mentioned Claude McKay, because I discovered Claude McKay a couple of years ago, and it made me look at Paris very, very differently. Gave me such a different perspective. And you also did the same thing for me for Connecticut. And because The Emperor of Gladness is very much focused in Hartford. And Connecticut is often seen as a wealthy state, but you set this book in a town that really feels left behind. And especially what you just mentioned about how you go into fiction. What drew you to exploring that side of Connecticut? Because in many, many, many fictionalized Connecticut towns, we don't often see places like Gladness.
Well, I did realize Connecticut had a reputation until I left it which is often the case for people in any town or state. And when I went to New York to go to school, when I said I came from Connecticut, everyone said, "Oh, how fancy." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, it's full of mansions and private schools and yachts and golf clubs, golf clubs." And I just thought, "Gosh, when is that happening?" It's not the Connecticut that I knew. And then I realized that so much of the Connecticut formed by immigrants, Jamaican, Haitian, Dominican, Puerto Rican immigrants, Chinese immigrants who worked this land, many of whom worked the agriculture, the tobacco fields. Bradley International Airport was once a tobacco field, worked on by mostly Jamaican immigrants during World War II. And so I just thought, gosh, why is this so invisible? Why is my Hartford so different than Mark Twain's and Harry Beecher Stowe's and Wallace Stevens? And how come no one has spoken about that in an honest way, and in a way that doesn't always just denigrate it, right? Because
Right.
it's also a place people live and still live. My family still live there, actually. And it's a place where I also found my imagination. And it was, to my great dismay, a few years ago when I was researching the history of Hartford, I stumbled on a YouTube video, which is now a subgenre of YouTube videos, of trauma porn, of poverty porn, wherein, people would drive with cameras on the dashboard through quote unquote blighted cities. And it was to my dismay that I saw the neighborhood I grew up in one of these videos. And there's all of a sudden there's thousands of people all over the world, people commenting in the comments from Norway and Germany saying, "Oh gosh, look how horrible these people live." And I thought, that is so interesting because what I saw was life. I saw a vibrant, beautiful life. And I said, gosh, I have to, my only tool is language, and I have to use what I have to reposition this place as a place of possibility, because Hartford was also my greatest education of the larger, rifts and potentials of American life.
Well, I think my brain just had a shift here as you were mentioning that in terms of the YouTube subgenre. And it kind of makes me want to ask this question of, it feels like humanity hasn't changed much, because during the Victorian times, there was a similar sort of exploration, if you will, where people can do slum tourism. So you have the wealthier people who can go into the slums, as they call it. I guess the equivalent would be the blighted cities today. And they can go and take a tour in their carriages and see how people lived, I guess, as sort of a zoological experience. I think that would be a way to describe it. And it's actually amazing to me to learn that that's a thing today.
Yeah, it's some things, the appetite for that doesn't change, doesn't it? And it's that kind of, it just shifts in technology. And during the 19th century in Europe, particularly in France, there was this spread of Orientalism, where Gustave Flaubert, famous for Madame Bovary, was sent to Africa to write titillating reportage of the other, the dark, unknown other of the Orientals. And that was incredibly titillating and for the French, elite audiences at the time. And so it's also deeply racialized too, because what you notice in these videos is that when there is a cluster or a group of black folks on the street, the camera would pan, right? And I'm like, I look at that and I said, it's just people living, right? But there's a kind of like, oh, look, and the camera literally tracks, the black body in life, in flux. There's just people living their lives. And so it is, zoological is a devastating yet a devastatingly accurate way of looking at it. And it was galling to me, because I thought I was just trying to map, old city streets and see landmarks, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the places where I played, the grocery stores I shopped with my family, and it's seen as entertainment to the rest of the world.
Well, and I definitely want to come back to exploring how the Hartford that you saw, the Hartford that you lived, and the Hartford that you put on the pages. But I do want to turn to some of your characters in the book. For 2 years, you yourself were a caretaker for your partner's grandmother, Grazina, who inspired the character with the same name in The Emperor of Gladness. And Grazina and Hai, your central character, come across each other sort of by happenstance. And the book opens with Hai standing on a bridge, intending to end his own life. Grazina is an elderly Lithuanian refugee and widow living alone with dementia, and Hai somehow becomes her caregiver. And so this book really explores their relationship, the world they build together. And I couldn't help but think about the people that aren't our blood relatives and have become our chosen family or our intentional family. What did it look like to you when you're exploring this relationship? And I imagine you reflect on your own experience of caretaking.
Yeah, I think the body in need, or the body in need of care, the body's failure, the mind's failure, which is what dementia often is. It doesn't mean it's wrong. You have to just follow those that progression where it is. Who's to say her reality was any different than mine? We were just having two different realities, and so I learned a lot of grace. And I learned that you have to meet the body where it is, and there's very little. There's surprisingly very few decisions one has to make. It is difficult work, but you don't see the difficulty because the needs are so immediate. And honestly, at the time, I thought it was such a blessing to me. I was, I was given in exchange for caretaking a place to live so I can go to school. Otherwise, I don't think I would not have been able to finish my degree at Brooklyn College if not for that exchange. And so I did not see it as laborious. It was just what's in front of you. And in retrospect, yeah, it was a lot to chew for a 19-year-old who's playing nurse. But to answer your question, I think so much of the solution to those questions are often just being present, and time and the body's needs pull you forward. And you find yourself doing things that you don't even think about. Bathing Gregina, being present, being patient with her, following her hallucinations. Those are just part of the ecosystem that you're in. Just like weather. You don't really have a choice whether it rains or snows. You just have to deal with it. And I found a way to kind of work with that, and it was one of the most foundational moments in my life where I thought, gosh, what a quintessential American moment. We have two refugees from two different wars. Gregina fleeing Stalin in World War II. She was in Dresden during the infamous Dresden bombing, which lasted, I believe, only 2 days, but she was in the midst of that as a 17-year-old girl. And, here we are, two wars, two continents, 30 years apart in the conflict, and yet we are under one roof trying to cobble together this very hobbled American life. And suddenly I felt, oh gosh, maybe this is what this country is about. It's about trying to fashion something out of debris. And in many senses, both Gregina and I were debris ejected from two very different epicenters.
Well, when you use the word blessing, I can't help but wonder if there is a sort of a healing that happens maybe with yourself, with Grazina, or with Hai when he takes care of Grazina. And I won't go into too much detail here with the scene, but there is a scene where Grazina does slip back into one of her episodes where she's back in World War II. And this is very early on in Hai's experience with her. And he specifically has a moment where he wants to learn more about Grazina's history so he can build out his own character in those moments to make things more believable for Grazina. And I feel like with what you just described, I'm curious to hear, the blurring of the lines between fiction and nonfiction. Do you feel like there is a growth or change when we take care of another human being And I asked that because I wonder if Hai was surprised at himself that he wanted to do something like that. And it jumped out to me because it felt very natural. Like you just mentioned, there are things that you don't really think about when you're doing the thing. It's just it comes very organically. And that particular scene, it tells me something about Hai's nature, I think.
Yeah, the undercurrent, that's a really brilliant observation. I think the undercurrent theme, the subtext that I'm interested in this book, is fictive storytelling at large, not just in literary fiction or in a book, but in the stories we tell each other. Every single character here, in a way, is as a novelist. They're telling different stories about their lives, and a lot of it is about deception, which is why fast food is also an undercurrent, because so much of fast food is about deception and fantasy and facades, the front of the house and the back of the house. And I'm interested, what is the back of the house of the mind? What is the back of the house of the personality? What is the backstage of our day-to-day discourse? What does that look like? And it's interesting that sometimes we have to put on different characters en masse to really talk about the difficult things. And when Gregina and Hai discuss Gregina's family, they often do it in this kind of role play. They discuss family and deep rifts in family through role play. And Hai starts to reveal his love life, a boy that he lost to the opioid epidemic through this role playing, military Sergeant Pepper, and so I think it becomes a kind of Russian doll, where inside the story is perhaps the truer story they're telling each other using a kind of puppetry and kind of deception. And I think I'm interested in kind of repositioning the moral aptitude of deception and lying in this country, because I think from a puritanical roots, we see the ultimate taboo of any American life is to lie. And you see this with politics. But in fact, politics perform honesty, performs directness. But in the back rooms, there's so much lies that happen with handshake deals and what have you. And so we've kind of condemned deception. But to me, when people have little to give each other, when they don't have millions and billions to perform altruistic philanthropy, they give each other stories. And that's what these folks have. They turn stories into bridges and rooms and detours from which to understand each other. So the deception becomes a kind of mechanism of exploration rather than this sort of moral corruptedness that's often been attributed to lying in our culture.
That was Ocean Vuong. He is a Connecticut native and author of the 2025 bestseller, The Emperor of Gladness. You can find a link to the book and this full conversation on our website, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. Listeners can check out all of our author interviews and get the latest scoop on all things literary from me and my team at ctpublic.org/whereweread. Sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on all of our author talks and book events in 2026 by subscribing. That's ctpublic.org/whereweread. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And as always, thanks so much for listening.